I ended up at a New Year's party in the kitchen with various members of Rote Kapelle, and they had a singer who had just left them to be in the shop assistants, Alex, who I thought was a guy because it was Alex. And we were talking, they just says, oh, do you want to come and sing in our band? It was just like that. So I think then the next day, a couple of days later, I turned up for a rehearsal at Blair Street practice rooms, legendary at the time, where all of Edinburgh practiced, Blair Street and Nidri Street. And I turned up for a practice and that was it. They handed me some words that Alex had written and I sang those, and then I just had to make up stuff. Interesting.
Before we started recording, we were just talking about, when you're young, how you're just sort of like carefree and sort of worry-free, and like to me now that just seemed, if somebody asked me, I'd be like, whoa.
Yeah.
But just to talk me through the process of like how you felt, and it just seems amazing that you just went along and somebody asked you to be in a band next day. You're just making up lyrics as you speak.
With a gig imminent as well. What it was like, it was pretty amazing really, because in my little head it was everything I was wanting. So it was very exciting, and I was shy and embarrassed because I'd never sang in a microphone, and then our practice room was quite small and, really skanky, as all the rooms were, but totally fine and functional, but I'd never seen anything like that before. But the main thing that I remember is it was a small room, not much bigger than this room, more narrow. It was so loud. It was so loud. I'd never heard anything that loud in my life. So I remember just this oral, assault. And I remember that couldn't really hear myself at all, which was just the way in practice rooms. So it was just this oral assault, not being able to hear yourself and being a bit embarrassed because I'd never done that before. And I was really embarrassed when I had to sing my own words. But luckily you couldn't hear them very well, so that helped me. So because it took a little while to get used to that. But I remember excitement and senses and levels that I'd never experienced. So it was pretty amazing.
And how in line were, you were asked to join this band, obviously I'm assuming you had heard them before with Alex. Okay, so just to lead me through sort of what the sound was like, the excitement of like hearing them, and how that related to other bands that you've been going to see, like the Smiths and the Bunnymen. Yeah,
it was punky and discordant, and I liked that. I think I didn't really mind what I knew I was going to go along to this rehearsal. Obviously, if I hadn't liked what they were doing, I wouldn't have carried on. But I wasn't that bothered about not having heard them. I suppose it was in the and they all liked the Birthday Party too, and I loved the Birthday Party, and there was definitely some of that in it. So I was very happy with how it sounded and happy to go on, and that was just it. I was in the band.
And things like that work two ways. You are putting a bit of faith in them, not having heard them, but there were people that you probably, I know you said you met them or you were asked at a New Year's party. Can you just talk me through the process of the people in the band, who was in that lineup at the time, how you knew them, and also if you can let's just stick with that at the moment, and then
okay. I met all of them. I met Andrew Tully, Chris Henman and Malcolm Kurgan. So Andrew was the singer, Chris was the guitarist, and Malcolm was the bass player. And there were two other members, Ian Binns, who played keyboards, and Johnny Muir, who played drums, who weren't at that party. I don't think, or I don't remember them being there. We had been talking about, I don't know, we've been talking about music and things like that. So we knew there was some sort of simpatico thing going on with us about music and things like that. What was interesting about Rote Kapelle was how they wrote songs, which I didn't know there were other ways to do it, but it was quite, it was incredibly democratic because all the songs were written in the practice room, and they were just from riffing together, and the songs would grow from that. And it's actually a really difficult way to write songs as well. It's very chaotic and go on for a long time. It can be really boring until something clicks, and it can be really frustrating. But I didn't realise it at the time as well, especially Chris and Malcolm were incredible musicians. They were amazing, really interesting, different, brilliant musicians. So they came up with these really weird, quirky, complex riffs that were kind of amazing. And the way the band developed, because I started off as backing singer, and then it just ended up that me and Andrew both sang together, and we would never collaborate with lyrics or anything. He would write his bit and I would write mine, and they just would kind of fit. And we tended not to sing. We sang completely different bits over each other, and it was actually a really interesting way to write music. And well, John Peel liked us, but not that many other people did. But at the time, that was great that John Peel liked us. That was fine. We all tended to go to the same clubs. A lot of us shared flats with each other, and or if you toured, there was the inevitable mixtape, and everybody's mixtape would bleed into somebody else's mixtape, and it would just it's cyclical, really. The music would go round and round and expand slightly, and go round and round and expand slightly. I think those are the reasons.
Okay. And from, you know, I'm assuming we're probably talking about like 1984, so 1985. At the moment, Edinburgh had such a vibrant scene with like Bob Last's past products, but that, you know, essentially like 1982, that had completely gone. Was there a sense that there was like a sort of wilderness period, and you were trying to, you know, sort of restart this Edinburgh scene? What was the feeling amongst your contemporaries? You know, was it just like an age gap? You know, at the time, the people like Davy Henderson being like 2-3 years older would probably be a massive difference.
Yeah, there was a I don't know if age gap is the right, but or a generational gap, even though the age thing wasn't that long. But I arrived in Edinburgh and that had all finished. But I think it had ignited a spark that I think it paved the way for the next set of music. I certainly didn't. I felt like I arrived in a city that was just full of possibilities. It didn't feel like a wilderness period at all. And the legacy of that era, of the fire engines and the scars and things, it was just really healthy and fertile, and we were all very much into that. But it had pretty much finished when I got to Edinburgh. But Edinburgh was full of small venues. It was relatively cheap to put a band on. It was relatively cheap to have a practice room. It was actually quite easy to get gigs outside Edinburgh. There was an infrastructure in the UK, a reciprocal infrastructure, which is really important because, well, I don't know if we were the exception. I don't think we were, but a lot of us put bands on as well. And then if you put a band on, you'd put them up at your house, and that made that easier, and they would reciprocate in their city, and that's how it was actually quite fluid in the whole of the UK. So I never felt like it was a wilderness period. I felt like it was just a really happening place where stuff happened, and it was actually quite easy. And yeah, just full of possibilities.
Is that there's like, compared with even the Edinburgh scene from earlier on, the Glasgow scene, there's like very few sort of females really in the scene in Glasgow. You've got, obviously there's like Jill and Rose from Strawberry Switchblade, Karen Parker.
I was going to say Karen Parker.
Bernice. But Edinburgh had like a much, you know, it was almost like very equal.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that, you know, and your reasons, you know, you think why there was such a, like, you know, as an outsider, it seems like a noticeable difference in the two scenes.
I can't speak for Glasgow. The only thing I can say about in Edinburgh was that It just appeared to be a time where being in a band was about being in a band because somebody wanted you in the band because they liked you, or yeah, pretty much that. It was your pals, because it wasn't about how you looked, I don't think. And it wasn't about your musical prowess particularly, I don't think. It was just about having like-minded people in bands. It was never a big deal for me being a female in a band. Later in the Fizz Bombs, we were mostly female, and that was casual. We didn't set out to be females in a band. We just asked the people who were around that we wanted to be in a band with, and it happened that way. Maybe it was more open in Edinburgh because it was a slightly smaller scene, but very rich scene. But it was very non-judgmental. I mean, no reviews ever spoke about how you looked. Didn't really make a deal about a female being in a band, and I always felt like I was just a person in a band, not a woman in a band. And it just wasn't. And also because it's that thing I said to you earlier about it felt like the possibilities were endless, as somebody once said. It just felt like that. So it didn't feel like possibilities for a woman or possibilities for, it just felt possibilities. They were there. So I, being young and naive, I didn't even think about it at all. I didn't think about feminism. I didn't think about women bands. I just thought, oh, I want to do this. I'm going to do this. Why can't I do this? In Glasgow, I don't know. Maybe it's just a physically bigger city. I don't know. And it was more diluted. I don't know if it was harder to be in bands in Glasgow. I just don't know, but it's true that in Edinburgh, and not just playing in bands, but around on the scene, in the audiences, putting on bands, it was much more diverse, demographic.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, and you know, to me, it's like when you have the shop assistants, it's not like Huggy Bear or something, you know, it's just a good band.
Yeah, exactly.
A really good band.
Well, that came about. We were all in the same class at Napier, and David was getting the band together. He had Alex, and Sarah was also in our class, and he asked her. And Laura was in another class in the same year, and he asked her. And Anne was in our class because originally Shop Assistants had 2 drummers, and she was about, so he asked her. Actually, there weren't that many. It was much more female than male in our class, so that's how that happened. But it was never, oh, David's going to get a bunch of girls to be in a band with. Never really occurred to anybody. Just was.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting, and it's like very clear. You know, you don't really think about it as, listen, it's just like the shop assistants are just a
band.
Yeah.
Exactly, as it should be. Yeah. But it's interesting that when David talked about his singer Alex, I did assume it was a guy as well until I met Alex at a party.
So I think it's probably a good point to, you know, what I was going to use later on as a way to sort of seek in is that you know, you mentioned you were just like asked to join a band, and you know, then you talked about Jesse Garon, and just like everyone sort of seeking in to bands. I think it's probably a good point to talk about the shop assistant now, and we'd mentioned the pastels. So I'm just using like bullet points to try and get as chronological as possible. But there's some things we'll sort of like go back and forward a little bit. Aggie or Booba and the shop assistants were a sort of like precursor to the shop assistants. Obviously, there was like a heavy
with David
pastels,
Keegan.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Maybe do you think it's a good point to start on the history of the shop assistants?
If you want, what do you want to know?
I just really want to know. You know, it's like we'll be cutting in. You know, like how the shop assistants like evolved. You know, where they started, and you know, my understanding is it's just that, you know, David and Stephen were going to do like a single together, and the pastels helped out, and then the shop assistants evolved from that. But I don't know if that's the starting point for that. You know, if you could tell me
my end.
Yeah, I think that's going to be like better rather than me just like, you know.
Yeah. Well, the shop assistants, from my recollections, I think it happened from that class in Napier, Napier College at the time. I had actually seen, unbeknownst to me, I thought I'd seen the Pastels, but I'd kind of seen Booba and the shop assistants, because David was, oh no, David played in the sound check. He played in the sound check. So I'd met David before, although I didn't realise it at the time in class. David played in the sound check for the Pastels. I thought he was in the Pastels, so later I went up to David at this gig and said, I really like your band. David's a quite quiet, shy guy and didn't tell me that he wasn't in the band. Anyway, I forgot all about it, and then later I was at Napier in this class with this guy, and we suddenly both realised that we had met before. And David, yeah, he was putting together a band, and yeah, he asked the people around him. So he asked the people in, and it was quite interesting. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear why they decided to have two drummers, and one of them just played the floor tom, and one of them just played the snare. They didn't stay like that for very long. Then it was Laura. Got incredibly fast drummer, because later when I played drums for the shop assistants, I could not play them as fast as she had. Yeah, so that it seemed very simple. It was that thing of asking the people around you who you thought, oh, I wouldn't mind being in a band with you. And they happened, and they seemed to get a buzz really fast. They were really great. I think the combination of David was an incredible guitarist. He was like a rhythm and lead guitarist at the same time, and he made a really full sound. And then Alex had this just lovely, wispy, gentle voice over the top of it, and her lyrics were very particular as well. They were quite poetic, and I think quite, mature. And it just was a pretty unique sound at the time, even though it was referencing, the Buzzcocks and the Undertones and the Shangri-Las, but it didn't sound like them particularly. So everything seemed to click for the shop assistants really fast. And it was like a little snowball. It just it started, and their singles, small indie singles, did really well. They started to tour really fast. I did go on all the tours with them, because I was like, when I think about it now, what a pain in the ass I must have been. Another person in the van, another mouth to feed, another whatever. But that's what you do when you're younger. You go with your mates. So the gigs, they were getting really good reviews. They got chased by majors. They were one of the first indie bands of that type to get chased by majors. And I think they kind of set the benchmark for the rest of us. That we all kind of thought, well, I think also maybe stupidly, naively thought that was going to happen to us, without realising it was a fairly unique set of circumstances. So it was pretty interesting to watch it at first hand, how fast it was, and how big it became quite quickly.
And you mentioned, that's one of the things I was going to ask you, was it inspiring, their, not so much like success, but just that they were like achieving what
Yeah.
they know?
Well, it was exciting, because they were just doing such exciting things. They were playing really big gigs. They were playing with, really, cool bands, and the Mary Chain liked them, and they went on tour with the Jesus and Mary Chain, and really interesting people. Mayo Thompson produced their album from the Red Crayola, and that was exciting. And you get to meet all these people, and I don't know, I remember Morrissey wanted to produce them. That was exciting. And I remember Edwyn Collins coming and asking them to be considered for their producer, and that was exciting. It was just really fun and exciting, and you were touring with your pals, and going to see good gigs every night, and having fun, and drinking and dancing to music. What's not to like?
Absolutely. Now, when you're out on tour, what other bands, like in other cities, did you want to talk a little bit about similar scenes in different cities? Because it seemed, that there's like very, very similar scenes in every city, but how did this all sort of connect? And, was there anyone in particular that you thought, oh wow, that's like interesting? Is it something?
I think that I connected and clicked more with what was going on up here and what was going on in Glasgow, but there certainly, we felt like if we ever went, when we toured, we'd always go to Bristol because there was a really similar scene in Bristol. There was Subway Records, we would play the Tropic Club or wherever there, and there was a whole bunch of bands from Bristol, and of course London. Bristol is the one that really springs to mind. Yeah, and then there were particular venues along the way. Brighton, the oh God, was it called the something club? The Zap Club, the Whoosh Club.
I think we used to put that place at Concord, but I can't remember what it's called.
No, Brighton had a really interesting scene, but it was a sort of a subset of London almost. But I think Bristol was the interesting one, and then there were bands like the Clouds and the Razor Cuts and you know, Tallulah Gosh and bands like that. I didn't necessarily always love what they were doing, but you know, they were like-minded people doing similar things to us. So it was interesting. And then there was a sort of there was London squat scene that My Bloody Valentine came from, and we'd put them on and they put us up in London and helped us out with equipment. So that was that reciprocal thing that was really fed that scene.
And in terms of, you know, the way records were distributed, do you want to go into too much detail about, like, you know, fast forward at the moment, unless you think it's important, but you know, not just bands putting each other up and being reciprocal. There was like almost like the cartel where records were distributed as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, gosh, the infrastructure and the way things were just facilitated a small indie scene at the time. So I suppose the internet does that now, although you might be overwhelmed by the massive selection out there. It wasn't like that. But the infrastructure, like the cartel, really helped us. So you could put out, if somebody didn't want to, you could put your own record out and you would do 1,000 copies and you could afford to do that. And the cartel or Fast Forward would distribute it for you, and you would get a presence. Your record would get played on the radio, and 1,000 records would get you into the top 10 of the NME Indie chart. I certainly got the fizz bombs pretty high, and we didn't sell that many records. So it was just a smaller scene, although it seemed to have quite a dispersed audience. And that smaller scene just, again, facilitated the movement, if you like. I think that DIY attitude was very prevalent. So if somebody wasn't going to do it for you, you would do it yourself. So if I don't, luckily most of the bands I was in, somebody else put our records out. But I think Rote Kapelle, we certainly, and a few times we put our own thing out. And it was just a case of, well, we'll just get it out there then and see what happens, you know. And we'll print the sleeves ourselves and colour them in ourselves. And I think it was just a DIY attitude that went all the way through, except for a few incredibly ambitious and far-thinking individuals like Alan McGee, who always had their eye on a much bigger picture. Yeah. Remember Alan McGee talking about how he was going to get the Jesus Mary chain on top of the Pops and things like that. It's just like, that's just crazy talk. That's not going to happen. The rest is history.
Yeah, that's like an interesting. Actually, did you? Yeah, because I was mentioning like a lot of, you know, there's probably a lot in hindsight and rose-tinted spectacles now. When you look at like certain labels, you can probably build like your, you know, like this is what labels set out to do. This is what they manifest. It might not be the case. Was it a feeling of going to be part of something, or is it just this is what we need to do to get a record out?
Oh gosh, that would imply that you would have to have a plan, and we so didn't have a plan. We were so chaotic, and we were just hand to mouth. Just what we wanted to do was to play gigs and to have some records out, and making money would have been nice, and we knew it could happen because the shop assistants had managed it. We knew it was there, but we weren't that organised or that ambitious. And we certainly with the Desperadoes had a big chance, and we absolutely blew it because we were unorganised and pathetic in terms of ambition. But it was fun.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. So I think now is a good point to, we're talking about Rote Kapelle. It's the first band you're in, so I know, although I've spoken to Angus about it and I've read as much as I can, I'm still slightly...
Most of it's wrong, by the way, the stuff that's written.
Is it?
Yeah, there's so many errors. People wrong, places wrong, names wrong. Yeah.
So
what happened next?
Rote Kapelle into Jesse Garon, are they the same band?
No, very different. So after a very short time in Rote Kapelle, Andrew had another band, but they were just half-formed band, and they had been called Das Einhornchen, which means the squirrel in German, yeah. So that was Andrew, Kevin McMahon and Stuart Metcalf. And they all played guitar and Andrew sang. So they were looking to expand. So after a little bit of time in Rote Kapelle, Andrew said to me, do you want to come and play drums for our band? So I was like, yeah, okay. No, I couldn't play the drums. Did I know if I could? No, I didn't. But I had seen the Shop Assistants and I had seen Primal Scream Primal Scream had a proper drummer. Jesus and Mary Chain had Bobby Gillespie, and I knew that you could just stand and do that, and I was also a big fan of Mo Tucker. I knew you didn't have to do things a specific way. So I was like, yeah, sure. So I joined Jessica and the Desperadoes, so then we were 4. And I started just playing standy up drums and slowly learned a bit more, and we started playing gigs. We changed our name, thank God, from Das Einhornchen to Jesse Garon the Desperadoes. Do you know the name and what it means, yeah?
Yeah, if you could.
Okay,
just
so
for the audience.
Jesse Garon the Desperadoes, a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically named after Elvis Presley's dead twin brother, stillborn dead twin brother, Elvis Aaron and Jesse Garon. And I don't know why Andrew added the Desperadoes. I wonder if the young ones had an influence on him. I don't know. It just sounds like a bit of a Rick thing to say. And we did like the young ones. Anyway, it was Jesse Garon and the Desperadoes from then on. And that happened for just very shortly after I joined, needed a bass player. And Angus McPake, we knew from the Edinburgh scene. And he kind of played in a lot of... he was more part of the Edinburgh garage 60s psychedelic scene, and he was actually a better musician than any of the rest of us, so that was useful. He was, and he got much better as well, but he was way better than us. So he came and he played a really nice melodic bass over, at the time, some very basic guitar and drumming. So then we were 4. We were 4, and then became, eventually also Fran joined, Fran Shopler, who sang along with Andrew as a singer. And then we had the never-ending cycle of other guitarists, because we don't ever have a band with 3 guitarists. It's a nightmare. So then we just had many, many other guitarists. But that's how the band started. And the Desperadoes were really quite different from Rote Kapelle. It was a much more indie pop, wearing our Velvet Undergrounds and our 60s sensibilities on our sleeve a little bit more. And Andrew seemed to develop the secondary career as a bit of a stand-up, because his monologues in between became longer, and it was very funny, although Angus and I used to heckle him like hell, because he used to get really boring after a while, and I definitely threw a few drumsticks at him to get him going and get him to start a song. But it developed from there, and the Desperadoes kind of got a bit of a following quite quickly, because the gigs were very poppy and melodic and sing and dance along, and we played a lot, and we started putting out records.